Hey, thank you for letting me do this. This is a lot of fun for me. I have to say, with all sincerity, this is by far the most difficult presentation I have ever done, period. That is a very, very true statement. It took me a lot of time to put this together because of the audience. I'll talk a little bit about this audience in a little bit as we go forward. And the other, because we have a lot of ad hoc things in life that happen. And I go, okay, I got to talk about this experience. And as I'm trying to build the thing, I go, well, actually, I don't even know what I learned from that experience. So I don't even know how to communicate it to you. But I think it'll be informative. I hope it'll be informative. A little bit of background about me, just to kind of color what we're doing. I have a very odd background to be here. I went to Penn State undergrad, and then I was in our Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps at Penn State, and then I went straight to pilot training at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. I graduated there after a year. Then I became a T-37 instructor pilot at Williams before the base closed in 1992. This is a T-37. It's a twin engine. It's actually retired now, but it's a fully aerobatic spin type aircraft. High performance, but very, very, very slow. But I flew this for a couple years, and then the base closed, and I went off to fly the E-3 AWACS Frisbee around the world. I did a lot of, although it says Tinker Air Force Base, I was deployed. This was during peacetime. I was deployed 300 days a year. I was particularly in Saudi Arabia, Turkey, watching the northern and southern no-fly zones of Iraq before the second Iraq war, and then also doing a lot of counter-drug stuff out of Panama. So we would go and do counter-drug surveillance, looking for low-flying aircraft over the Caribbean. So I did that for 4 years, and then I went back to the T-37. This is actually my last flight in the Air Force. That is, yes, Penn State cheerleader Barbie. I was a T-37 instructor at the instructor school. I was also an evaluator pilot. I'll talk about that experience in a few minutes. And I was a spin demonstration pilot. And then I got out and I went to get a PhD at Penn State. And then at the time, Penn State had a fantastic PhD program in accounting, one of the better ones. We were placing people at MIT, Harvard. We placed somebody at Northwestern and Wharton. And of course, I landed here. I do research in insider trading, exec comp, financial reporting standards, and international accounting, and I teach the International Accounting Advanced course here. I should say I taught, because I am leaving the school this year. And we'll talk about that if you want later, but I'm not going to bring that through here. I have 2 daughters and a son, a brand new baby. He's 8 months old, and they love to draw pictures for you, and today is no exception. So that's Ryan, Taylor, and Megan. Why was I selected to provide this lecture? I actually have no idea.
You would have found out.
Well, okay, well, I'll tell you what I think. Is it because of this? I'm closer to dead than you. In fact, you shouldn't have friended me, Kathy. In fact, I'm right here. I'm right here at this scary part where I'm halfway dead. So I have more to talk about than you do. And you guys are still partying in foam, and I'm changing diapers. I also owe the academic committee a lot of money, and they are extracting rent from me. So there were 25 take your professor to lunches, a $15 gift card, so $375 I owe you guys. So this is part of that compensation. Why did I agree to do this talk? I think it's extremely important to stop and reflect on where you've been before you step out and go further, and this is an opportunity for me to do that. I also think this is extremely important for me. I actually believe that you can be more successful if you internalize other people's experiences. For some reason, teenagers have a very difficult time doing that, and they have to learn on their own through their own pain. But sometimes I actually watch what other people do, and maybe you can learn from my personal experience. I also think it's important for me to implicitly honor some of the people who had a material impact in my life. I would not be here without the help of several people. I'm not going to talk a lot about them, unfortunately, but this is implicitly honoring them. And also, I'm trying to get more free lunch. I am free some next week. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. It was very difficult for me to kind of collapse this, so I'm going to go through an experiential lesson about whistleblowing, some perspective for the ambitious, because I'm extremely ambitious and I know that you are, and I'm actually struggling with an issue that I'll discuss with you, and I suspect many of you will have the same issue going forward. Some thoughts about vulnerability, relationships, because many of you are at an age where you are considering or you are entering long-term relationships, and I have some serious fundamental philosophies about that. And then some pretty cool closing thoughts. So it's kind of ambitious, but here we go. This is the whistleblowing. This is a serious thing, and I know that you don't understand what this thing is. So let me explain this. We don't need a lot of this, but I was flying as an evaluator pilot in the T-37. We had a brand new lieutenant colonel. I'm a captain. He's a lieutenant colonel. He's a fighter pilot, so he outranks me by a lot. He's coming into our squadron leadership. And he is, again, he's a fighter pilot, so I kind of defer, wow, this guy's flown a lot and he's had a lot of experience. He's also going to be part of our squadron cadre, and so there's a fraternity in our squadron. We kind of take care of each other. So we're flying this mission, and he does a bunch of stupid things in the area, and I'm not allowed to talk to him throughout the entire flight. So I'm just sitting there as a passenger, and we're flying in, and we're doing a typical instrument approach into Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio. And what this means is this is the approach to the runway to the north. This is an approach to the runway to the north here. This here, this 1,040 is an altitude called a minimum descent altitude. Any pilots in the room? Nobody? Okay. It's a minimum descent altitude, which for this particular approach, you are not at all even 1 foot supposed to go below that altitude unless you're in a position visually to hit the glide path and you can go in for the landing. So you have to see the runway, you have to be on glide path before you can descend below that altitude. So we're flying along, we are not in a position to get to the glide path, and he drops 200 feet below that altitude, which is a check ride bust for any human being in the Air Force, period. It's a clear bust, it's over. And part of the reason why is because 840 feet puts me 27 feet below this obstacle right here. This is a set of towers, and it's actually 200 feet below those other towers. And so I go altitude, and he raises, he climbs finally back up to altitude, and we get down on the ground, and I go, okay, what do I do with this guy who's going to be one of my leaders in the squadron? He outranks me by a lot. He's a fighter pilot, and we're a fraternity. How do I handle this? And it's really embarrassing to go through this. And I said, okay, sir, here's the deal. You screwed up. I should bust you. And he goes, oh, I know. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again. On and on and on and on. I didn't bust him. It was a clear-cut bust. So he's in a position where he has no thrust to make the runway. He doesn't have time to restart the engine. They eject. They get injured, but not severely. And the airplane crashes. It's a brand new aircraft. They haven't even transitioned people on it. The airplane's toast, so the taxpayers all threw their money away on that. And it was completely avoidable, rather. Completely avoidable. And the funny thing is, I sit back and I heard about this and I go, you know, I could have pulled him out, and I should have pulled him out, because there were so many instances during this flight when I was his evaluator when I could have said, this is crap. You're done until we get you through a flight evaluation process. And that's the process that they go through if you bust check rides. And you needed to be evaluated. In fact, I don't think his head was in the game, but I deferred to the fact that he was in a higher ranking position. He was an important person to the squadron, and I felt kind of compelled to do it. And so you map this into your due diligence meetings. I mean, it doesn't take a lot, I think, for me to kind of map this into where you guys are going. There are a lot of decisions that are going to be made where you're going to be in an opportunity where you smell it out and you sniff it out and you kind of know it doesn't smell right. You got to make the call. You have to make the call, because the implications could be severe, particularly now. We're seeing all kinds of fallout in the economic markets where people didn't blow the whistle and didn't make the call, and people are getting hurt as a result. I'm actually very thankful. I don't know what's happening to this guy or what's happened to him. I have to believe he retired, but I'm very thankful nobody got killed here, because very easily, I mean, this is on an approach. When they ejected, they were on approach to final, and there's all kinds of buildings underneath these approach patterns. So nobody got killed out of that. So that's my whistleblowing story. Hopefully that resonates for you. This thing is something a little bit, we're going to transition to something I actually feel very strongly about. And this is in perspective for the ambitious. Let's start with the set of all human beings. And then let's jump over and say, hey, we're fortunate to now be in the set of all human beings domiciled in an economically advantaged country. Or we could say we're wealthy. And let's say, hey, we're actually better than that. We're in the set of all college graduates. So I feel very fortunate to be in the set of all college graduates. I went further. Dustin, you here? Dustin's not here? Aww. Anyway, Dustin and I are part of the set of all Air Force officers because he went to the Air Force Academy. And that's a pretty elite set. If you think about the unconditional probability of going through college and getting an Air Force commission, it's a very, very small set of people. It's a very elite group, and it actually is a fraternity, implicit fraternity. So we're proud to be part of that set. But you know what? I actually got to a better set than he did because I was an Air Force pilot. And I say that jokingly, but it's actually serious because that's how people think in the Air Force. I'm sorry, that's how the pilots think in the Air Force. That's not how everybody thinks in the Air Force, but I will tell you that the pilots think that they're the better set. So I'm part of the set of the Air Force pilots, but I'm not a fighter pilot, and I want to be a fighter pilot. And I'm not a fighter pilot. And you know what funny is? All of my fighter pilot friends are pissed because they're not weapons school graduates. And all the weapons school graduates are pissed because they're not on the fast track for promotion. Let's map it into another one. This one I'm living today, set of all human beings, set of all literate human beings, set of all college graduates, set of all PhDs. How many people in the world have PhDs? Very few. Almost nobody, relatively speaking. How many of them are elite school professors? Do you have any idea what the probability is of somebody being able to stand here in front of you? You have any idea how low the probability is when you take a look at that, right? But that's not good enough because I want to be tenured. I want to be tenured, and I'm living with this right now because that's an uncertain outcome. If you continue to select into more successful peer groups, sooner or later you will become the left tail of your reference distribution. You're at Stanford University. There are Nobel laureates here. They're smarter than you. You're already in the left tail. Probably. Especially if you're Matt Armstrong. Is he here? He's not here. Okay, I can pick on Matt then. Okay, I'm going to pick on Matt. This, I think, is very critical, okay? Because we're ambitious. We want to continue. But the problem is, it is important. You should be ambitious. I'm ambitious. I will always be ambitious. The problem here is that ambition is addictive. I'll admit it. I'm addicted to ambition. An ambitious person might consider this to be a failure. And this could be wealth. I see it in my community. I live in Woodside. I know that I'm not a millionaire. I'd like to be a millionaire. And I can tell you definitively, without naming names, I know millionaires that are not happy that they're just millionaires. I know them. I can name them if you want, but I won't. This could be intellectual distribution. This is the left tail dilemma. This can be considered a failure, and almost every one of you at some point will face this. I am living it. It, in my mind, seems important to find perspective, because if you end up sitting at the right of the next lower group, so if you remember, the next lower group is somewhere over here, and if you're over at the right, if you're in here, you're at the left. One experience I've had is if you make it to the elite group, you're probably not respected well in that elite group. You're probably the lowest ranking person in that elite group. And so you're not so clear it's a good thing to be in that elite group. But if you don't, you might actually have a better fit and be more productive over just to the left of that group. Or it might be a good time to look for something different to do. So that's the takeaway. This is what I'm wrestling with. But I think it's very critical, because I think you are all ambitious, and I guarantee you that many of you in this room will hit this if you have not yet already. The thing is, you guys are still early enough in your careers that you may not have gotten that far, because you're still kind of working the ambition ladder. But you're going to hit this. This is something I think is kind of cool, because this reminds me of me and you. When I went through pilot training, the very first thing we did was discuss stuff before we ever flew an airplane. And they said, okay, you guys fit a certain pilot personality profile. And I actually borrowed this from some research that's out there about what a typical pilot, particularly a military pilot, is in kind of a personality. And I think that these kind of map in to you folks. Emotionally stable, low anxiety, low impulsiveness, except for Matt Armstrong. Conscientious, competent, high assertiveness, high achieving. And what I find particularly interesting is this low sense of vulnerability. Because we're control animals, and we're like, hey, I'm in control. I got it all covered. I'm a risk. You know, I know how to assess risks, and I don't feel particularly vulnerable. But we're all vulnerable. And I'll illustrate how I was vulnerable. February 8th, 1991, I was flying with Captain John Black. I was a T-38 student pilot in the supersonic jet. It was about the 11th month of a 12-month pilot training program. And we're flying at March Air Force Base, which is now closed. It's actually Air Reserve Base. This is the runway layout. This is runway 32, which means we're heading 320 on a compass when we're taking off. So we're heading 320 off of this runway. We're heading up that direction. It's at night on a night navigation mission. And because of the winds are coming from the right, they're coming from the east, I drift a little bit when I take off. That's natural. It's called crabbing. So that you can maintain your course, you crab into the wind as you take off. So my compass is 330 when I get a call from tower saying turn to 150, turn to a heading of 150. Pilots know that they always turn in the shortest direction unless they're told otherwise. And so I look down, I go, well, hell, it's 180 degrees. It doesn't matter which direction I go, I'm going to turn right. So I started a climbing right turn. 3 seconds later, I get a call, confirm you're in a left turn to 150. I go, negative, I'm in a right turn to 150. And at that point, John Black goes into full afterburner, raises the nose almost straight vertical, and starts a left bank turn. And we almost took out that tower. I was about 20 feet from that tower. February 5th, 1992, I was an instructor pilot with Mike Wood, who was flying my airplane, and this is now a lieutenant colonel. I won't name who it is. One of my better students, actually. Anyway, he was flying lead solo. So this guy is flying lead solo, and Mike Wood's flying my airplane. I'm sitting on the right-hand seat. And we're flying a two-ship. I'll show you how close these are in a minute. We're actually 3 feet apart, 3-foot wingtip clearance. At 250 miles an hour, 3 feet apart. And he orders a pitch out, which means that we're going to do this maneuver. I'll show you a video of this in a second. We're going to do a maneuver. He's going to turn first, and we're going to wait a few seconds and turn behind him and then do some trail maneuvering. This is one of the most absolutely generic maneuvers you can possibly have. So this is how close we typically fly. And you're going to see 2 examples of a pitch out. The first is to the left. So this is a left pitch out where the lead goes first, and then the wingman goes afterwards, and then you'll see it to the right in a second. So there's actually, the wingman went too fast there. You're supposed to wait longer. So this guy turns into me. I don't know what the hell he was thinking. He clearly wasn't, because he turns into me. So we're already 3 feet apart, and he turns into me. And these are very aggressive turns. So I'm not even flying my airplane. I immediately jam the stick full forward as fast as I can. We go up negative G's, and we hit our head into the ceiling, and he flies over us by about 4 inches. Last vulnerability one, some of you guys have seen this. This is Captain Mike Colasso. He was a friend of mine. We were flying a low-level mission. This is in San Antonio. There was a lot of smoke in the air, so we had low visibility because of all these Mexican wildfires. And so we're flying a low-level mission. He yells, bird. I look up. There's a big black thing in my face. And this was a 14-pound turkey vulture that missed my head, went over the top, and impacted the tail of the airplane. So what's my point here? Even when you think you're in full control, you're incredibly vulnerable to environmental forces. This should seem obvious, and particularly for this group, you of all people, given the experiences that you've had with your cohort since you've been here, should recognize just how vulnerable we are as human beings. We're extremely vulnerable as human beings, even when you think you've got your shit together. Your vulnerability increases with success. The more successful you are, the more vulnerable you become, because you get complacent. I saw it in the Air Force over and over again. I lived it. I was extremely complacent when I was finishing up my flying tour because I was bored, and I've done it before. When you get successful, you get complacent. You also have increased tolerance for risk, and you also get rent-seeking threats, particularly if your success is financial. Your vulnerability increases, and what's funny is your sense of vulnerability typically goes down. And so I think it's important to continually recognize and embrace your vulnerability. I have a term for it called healthy paranoia. And I think it allows you to stay vigilant to ward off threats and help you stay grounded as a human being. In fact, I think the more you recognize that you're vulnerable, the more you can actually interact with kids and interact with your family. That doesn't mean be completely paranoid, but it means recognize that you're human. And the sad part is often it takes some sort of tragedy to somebody else to bring us back to this. Relationships. I know a lot about relationships. You guys are entering into long-term relationships now because you're at that age where you start thinking about relationships in more of a long-term basis. And one of the things that I don't think you're considering is that your career is also a relationship. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I can't say this strongly enough. The number one most important thing you need for a relationship is fundamental compatibility. I can't say that enough. If you don't have fundamental compatibility, it's not happening. It's not working long term. It will not happen. And in order to get there, you have to know what it is you must be able to do and what it is you absolutely will not tolerate. And I use The Bachelor as the perfect example to illustrate this. Who watches The Bachelor? Yay! I know Avion is. So The Bachelorette starts Monday, and I'm open to a Skype chat room if anybody's interested. Monday, 9 o'clock. But let's take a look at The Bachelor history. This chart, thankfully, thefrisky.com, I've never been there before, but thefrisky.com had this chart, and it shows you all the relationships that they've had, they're missing a couple on the end here. But they show you the success factors of all the relationships that they've put together, and actually, they claim that these two are still together, but in fact, they're not. Because Mary actually hit Byron and actually had to go to jail for that. So they don't work. Well, why don't they work? Well, because they're not fundamentally compatible. How do I know they're not fundamentally compatible? You can see it, you can taste it, you can watch it. They don't understand each other, number one. Number two, the type of people that have to go on national reality television to find somebody fail to know what it is they're about, I think. That's my opinion. So what happened with Brad? What happened with Brad? Somebody, come on. What happened with Brad? What happened on Brad's season? Say that again? He turned them both down. Thank you. Very nicely done. Thank you very much. I think that's critical. Why is that critical? The media went ape over that. The media said, oh, he's an idiot. He should have picked one. And how could he possibly do it? I go, this guy's a hero because he recognized that he absolutely will not give up what he believes in to hang out with somebody who's incompatible. And I actually find the guy to be a hero. In fact, I think he's probably, besides there's one that has, that's still together, they have babies and stuff like that. But besides them, so there's one success story that I'm aware of. But besides them, I think this is the role model here. Make sure you know what you want before you get into a long-term relationship, and you have to be fundamentally compatible for relationships, including your career. Your career is a relationship. You spend more time there than you do at home. Many of you seek transition when the challenge fades. I actually put all of you. That's why you're here. Many of you have a very strong sense of social responsibility. Most of you, actually all of you, like to call the shots. And all of you have a very low tolerance for inefficiency and waste. Trust me, I've taught you before. So here's what I think you'll miss most. Here's what I know you'll miss most. Here's what I will miss most. You ready to cry? Daily interaction with the most impeccably selected collection of the brightest, most genuine, most energetic, most interesting people in the world. You will never, ever, ever get an opportunity, except at reunion, to be around this cohort and this caliber again in your entire life. These people are fantastic. They're fascinating. They're very interesting. Why do I go to lunch with you? Because it's interesting. I actually get asked by the faculty, why are you going to lunch with students? Because they're interesting. More interesting than you are. No, I don't say that. Well, when you hang around Dave Larker long enough. No, I love Dave. Sorry, Dave. I'm not joking here. I actually think this is true. You will miss this dearly, and you should, because you're going to be around smart people because you select into being around smart people, but you will never get the daily interaction with this kind of group ever again. And you will miss this, and I hope you miss this. I've been asking this question for about 100 Air Force Academy applicants. So I was an Air Force Academy liaison officer, and I would interview high school students for the Air Force Academy. The first question I would ask them is, who was influential in your life? Every one of them could answer that question. I then would follow up with this type of a question, say, okay, who would say that you were actually one of the most important people in their lives, and they all stumbled and stopped. They could not answer this question. Granted, they were younger than you, and I know some of you have been able to answer this. This was a chance for you to hopefully self-reflect. What I think this is important about this is that I need you, I'm asking you to please expand this list. I don't care what's on the list. I don't care how deep it is. I don't care if it even exists. But I hope that you go home and start tomorrow to expand this list. And here's why. I can't give you a more sincere compliment than this. You guys are the role models for my children. It took me 6 years to come to that realization. But when I think about the types of human beings in this world that I actually want my kids to grow up to be, except for Matt Armstrong, you guys... Sorry, Matt, I love you too. But no, seriously though, I mean, these are the type, I mean, you're not going to get a better set. You're really not going to get a better set. And the fact that you're actually in this room and at this institution indicates that somebody took an active role in mentoring you as you got here. And it's time for you to kind of pay that back. I'm going to close off by saying this. Look, it's very hard to come up with an idea of how to distill 42 years of life into something that's meaningful for a group of people who are already at Stanford Business School. And I actually appreciate the opportunity because it allowed me a great chance to think a lot about stuff that I've done. It's been a pleasure and an honor to do this, and I appreciate the time.